Hello, it's your girl, Horror Queen Cosplay, and it is finally spooky season. First off, hello and welcome. As you can tell by my lovely cosplay handle, I love spooky stuff. Granted, it's not everything, there is queen because I love ball gowns, but I like spooky stuff. So why not make a fun little YouTube video talking about and recommending some of my favorite horror, spooky, and autumn and fall themed games. Of course, I'm not just going to be talking about horror games in this video. I do have a section that I want to talk about just like cozy autumn vibes. So here is a timestamp if you wish to skip all of the spooky and Halloween-y type of recommendations that I have in this video. I have a huge love of indie games, and I really wanted to showcase and talk about a bunch of games that maybe wouldn't appear on a best games to play for Halloween or October kind of list. Don't get me wrong, games like Alien Isolation, Outlast, Resident Evil are all fantastic games. I love me some Dead Space. I love Dead by Daylight, but what if you want to try something different? Now, I'm gonna have a mix of AAA to indie titles, maybe stuff you've heard of, maybe stuff you haven't. I'm gonna be keeping plots down to a minimum. Absolutely no plot twists and spoilers will be revealed in this video. I'm actually going to be trying to do not as much footage inclusion in this video as well, because I think one of the strengths in horror is the unexpected. So I want you to go into some of these maybe as blind as possible, or if you don't like to do that, hopefully this might tickle your interest in a few titles for you to look into further, or at least check out the Steam or Switch pages for. Most of these games on this list are highly accessible through PC, Switch, and other console options. A few of them are console exclusives or PC exclusives, but I try to make this list as inclusive as possible for every type of gamer out there. Finally, I will be holding up my list a few times. I do apologize, that is a baby YouTuber mistake, but I had a list, so I need to use it sometimes. My first recommendation that I want to talk about is the Costume Quest series. It is from the developers Double Fine, which you might know for the Psychonauts series, and these are very early games, but still you can see the charm, the cartooniness, the witty humor. It's an absolutely adorable double set of games. I do recommend playing the first one before the second one because the second one picks up literally where the first one ends. The point of these games are a bunch of kids on Halloween, and for the first game, you have to rescue your sibling, your twin sibling by the way, from a bunch of candy-stealing monsters. And the second game involves time travel and a dentist trying to stop Halloween from even existing. So it's very cute, and it also has turn-based combat, and your powers in the game are affected by whichever Halloween costume you're wearing. It's absolutely adorable, and I cannot recommend it enough for anybody who, whether you're streaming or just playing casually, wants a Halloween-specific themed game and maybe doesn't really want something horror. Of course, most of the recommendations that I have next on this list are horror, but I wanted to start off with something cute and something that I personally enjoy. Now, of course, this October of 2023, we are getting tons of fantastic horror titles coming out, and Alan Wake 2 is one that I'm really excited about. I really hope it's good. I've been a huge fan of all of the Remedy games for quite some time now. If you want to get into this game series, normally I would recommend playing Quantum Break, Alan Wake 1, Alan Wake's American Nightmare, Control, all of the DC for Control, especially the Alan Wake DLC, and then playing Alan Wake 2 because they are all essentially interconnected. But for the sake of just this video, let's just talk about the first Alan Wake game. The first Alan Wake game is a masterclass of cosmic horror, but not cosmic horror in the sense of Lovecraft. I'm talking about cosmic horror that you would see from The Twilight Zone. And The Twilight Zone is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, so there was just a sense of not quite nostalgia, but love that I had of this game and its very specific aesthetic and take on cosmic horror. Cosmic horror is something that is very difficult to do right, and Remedy does it really well. Control is my favorite out of their entire series. That is more of a take on SCP Foundation style cosmic horror. If you don't know what the SCP Foundation is, first off, I highly recommend checking out Volgun on YouTube. It is essentially like containing dangerous artifacts or creatures or entities. But yeah, cosmic horror is often referred to with H.P. Lovecraft, Cthulhu kind of style stories, but the Alan Wake games have a different take. The mechanics still run smooth. You can see so many other games take a lot of influence out of it. It's spooky, it's got a great aesthetic to it, fantastic characters, a banging soundtrack, and if you are interested in Alan Wake 2, I really do recommend checking out the first one. It's a great way to get into the season if you also are more inclined to more action style and less like jump scary type horror games. Next up is another AAA series, the Dark Pictures Anthology. I know I promised indie, but I want to talk about the Dark Pictures Anthology. They're technically not lesser known. This is a series of games by Supermassive Games. These are the people behind Until Dawn and The Quarry. The reason why I bring up these games is because I do believe that there is an order of playing them that I think can elevate your experience. Personally, when it came to these games, I played Until Dawn upon its release, and then subsequently I played every single one of their games that was not a VR title upon release. And I found when the Dark Pictures Anthology came out, the way that I tackled Man of Medan and saw that game was influenced highly based upon how Until Dawn functioned. I made a lot of decisions, a lot of thoughts, a lot of assumptions based upon Until Dawn, and I think that really added to the experience. And of course, my experience of Man of Medan influenced my experience of Little Hope, and so on and so on and so on. It's also a really great way to see the way the studio has evolved in their storytelling. These are games that can be played with friends. You can each assign a character to each other and just cause pure chaos. And there's a bit of a type of horror for everybody. Even the scares are done differently with each game since there are different directors. Until Dawn, unfortunately, is only available on PlayStation, so if you haven't played Until Dawn and you do have a PlayStation, of course I do recommend that. It's absolutely fantastic. A great blending of cheesy 80s slashers with a dash of a little something extra. And those tropes really lend into the story and how effective that game is. Every game has a stellar cast, from Rami Malek and Hayden Panettiere in Until Dawn, all the way to Ashley Tisdale in House of Ashes. Man of Medan is very isolation horror on an abandoned ship with a dash of World War II history. Little Hope is your very ghost-filled kind of story with Salem witch trial-esque storyline. It's not exactly the Salem witch trials, but these are witch trials of that time period. The third game, House of Ashes, is deep underground horror. And finally, you have the most recent, The Devil in Me, which is very Saw meets slasher in a horror inspired by the murder house of H.H. Holmes during the Chicago's World's Fair. If you're a history nut, you may have noticed something that each of these games are inspired by a piece of history. House of Ashes, I'm not going to spoil its piece of history, but I think knowing a lot about horror history and having an appreciation for mythology can be a really, really great asset and a really great extra way to enjoy House of Ashes. Obviously, you don't have to have that. That's just me. I enjoyed it a lot. All of these games are great. You don't have to play them in order. You can only pick one. If Little Hope doesn't sound interesting to you, but House of Ashes does, go right ahead. They are all fantastic games, and they have a lot of replayability based upon all the choices. Okay, don't worry, I did promise indies. And we are going to still talk about a few indies and maybe other lesser known games. Next up is Little Miss Fortune. Little Misfortune is done by the same studio that created Franbo. It has a very nice 2D, almost puppetry style to it. You follow a girl named Misfortune on an adventure with a very mysterious narrator. And this is a game that has fantastic fall aesthetics. I do not wish to spoil anything, but needless to say, there is a reason why I have a framed limited edition print from this game hanging up on my wall because, ooh, it hit real good. And it has a sequel coming out soon. Little Misfortune, she's charming, she's adorable. There are certain choices you can make in the game. It's a fantastic adventure. It does have horror elements to it, but it has more of a whimsical horror vibe to it. So again, if you're not super into the super scary stuff, it can be a really nice spooky treat for you this fall. Next up, I have a more recent title called The Chant. I streamed it, and it is another example of cosmic horror in which you have a character escaping a cult. It was a very fascinating game visually. There was a lot of color symbolism in the game. The creatures were interesting. It had a very interesting combat system. And I really enjoyed unraveling the mysteries behind the cult and other events that happened on the island prior to our character's arrival, what exactly the sources of these terrifying monsters were. It was overall a very good and enjoyable ride. And again, if you like mystery horror and you do like to have a little bit of combat in your story, The Chant is a great place to do it. And it's one that I wish more people talked about. Had an enjoyable main female character. Every character in the game has their own dash of trauma. And man, was that final boss fight wild. I told you guys no spoilers, but I will say the final boss fight was insane. I apologize if some of these reviews are really fast or really vague. Again, I want to keep things as little spoilery as possible, giving you little tastes, little dashes, maybe hopes that I could intrigue you. And please do feel free to ask more about these games in the comments or have your own Halloween recommendations. I would love to hear them. Next up, I want to talk about a game that got panned a lot when it came out, but has a bit of a cult following to it and is really enjoyable now at a modern playthrough, and one that I know will never ever get a remake or a remaster, but I wish it would. Murdered Soul Suspect. You might start to notice some of my specific horror loves and tendencies with some of these games recommendations. Murdered Soul Suspect is one where you play as a very cheesy noir style kind of detective and vibe who gets killed and has to solve his own murder. You spend the whole game as a ghost, which is very interesting. You get to play as a cat at one point, and it all takes place in Salem, so you get dashes of history in regards to the Salem witchcraft trials. I love it when my horror stories have history. I'm a Robert Eggers fan. Of course, it is an older game, so it might not be as tight, but it is still enjoyable, interesting, and has a great mystery to unfold. Next up, I also want to talk about The Evil Within. Speaking of further traumatized male protagonists, The Evil Within is in fact a AAA action survival horror style game with some of the original developers of Resident Evil, the original Resident Evil, involved in this game. While yes, a lot of people should hopefully know about The Evil Within, I feel like in later years it's not really talked about as much. Granted, it has been a while since the sequel came out, and the studio / developers that worked on those games have moved away from more traditional horror with their later titles like Ghostwire. But Evil Within feels more, especially the first one, feels more like a cult classic type of game. It's not your very typical horror game with guns where, yeah, you've got monsters, but you're pretty much a badass and can shoot them down. Towards the end of the game, you do feel more like a badass, but especially in the early to mid game, you have to rely a lot more on being sneaky, resource management. You can't take out every single enemy. The creature designs are very fascinating, very iconic. The DLC is fantastic. I love the Shade, or the Lamp Lady. She's so cool. She's my favorite in the entire game series. Overall, I do highly recommend it. I don't want to spoil anything out of it, but it's got great characters. You also have a very interesting story going on top of all of the action. You start to care about a few of the characters. There's betrayal, there's plot twists, and I think it makes the sequel, which is very, very polished, Evil Within 2, so much better when you have played the first one. I usually am somebody who recommends you play the first game before you play a sequel, just because so you can pick up on certain nuances. Especially with Evil Within, it feels gritty. It definitely is a product of its time period in terms of horror, and has plenty of spooks and plenty of stress and enjoyment for you all. Man, some of those boss fights were intense, I will say. Next up is a much shorter game called Stories Untold. This is about 2.5 hours long. I have a special love of indie horror games that are less than 4 hours. I think sometimes when you extend a horror game past that time period, the horror can lose its punch. And Stories Untold, while it is again another older title that has certain plot beats that maybe the industry and writing has grown out of, I think is very fascinating and very different. It uses a lot of text-based controls. Again, I don't want to spoil any of the plot twists, but its utilization of the environment, immersion, and sound design are its highlights. And frankly, it made me jump a few times. It can be very enjoyable to sit down, play in one sitting in a dark room, and you might get spooked a few times. That ties into my next recommendation, which is the Simulacra series. I know there's plenty of YouTuber playthroughs, one, especially the first and second game came out. The second game is probably the best one out of the entire series. I did not hate the third one, I will admit, and there is also a free one inspired by Flappy Bird, so 4 games in total. You don't have to play the first game to play the second one. Perfectly fine, I will grant that. But you get more and more out of the lore, and more is revealed as you play them in order. However, again, the second one is the best. It's a very puzzle game oriented with FMV sequences. You're essentially playing on a phone, trying to unlock someone's phone, spooky stuff happens. I will say when I played the first time, I had my headphones on, which is the best way to play, and the game made a glass tapping sound, like somebody tapping on glass, in the ear that was facing a window next to my desk. Needless to say, I almost peed my pants. It's very different. Again, if you like puzzle stuff, very difficult mind tricky things, note taking, it can be a really, really fun mystery to unearth. Moving along, I recommend literally every single game by the developer Chilla. Chilla is a game developer that focuses on 2-hour and less storylines. Every single game has a different spook, a different source of the horror. They have done games such as The Closing Shift, Night Security, Night Delivery, The Radio Station, Ghost Train, so many. Literally, you search up one of those titles and you'll easily be able to find all of their games. They're really great, short, and very effective. I get scared every single time, and they show growth and improvement with every single game they come out with. They literally just came out with one that I haven't had the chance to play yet called Parasocial. They are fantastic, and again, perfectly paced and great micro bite-sized horror games. Not every game needs to be 20 hours long to be enjoyable, and this is a really great example of shorter horror games that are extremely effective and spooky as heck. You do not want to play these in the dark. Personally, I can only handle playing these games on stream, so that way I feel like I have someone to talk to. As if I play these games alone, oh my god, I am not sleeping. That is for sure. You still with me? Because I got a lot more games to talk about. DARKWOOD, an Eastern European inspired horror game that is brutal, unforgiving. You want a challenge? DARKWOOD will kick your butt and spit on you. It is a top-down horror game with survival horror as the main focus. Combat's brutal, everything about it is brutal, but man, is it a great emotional ride that will wreck you if you stick with it. You want brutal horror, you want that feeling of hopelessness, Darkwood is the one for you. It's not a game for everybody, but I'm sure it just appealed to somebody, hopefully, watching. Next up is Madison, a horror game that is recent and absolutely scared the crap out of me. About 6 hours long, Madison is a game including a Polaroid camera, a young boy named Luca, and a very scary entity named Blue Knees. There's a song in this game that haunts me to this day. Sometimes I'll even sing it wandering around my house and that like I can feel a shiver crawling up my spine. It's a game that does rely on jump scares, but it doesn't utilize the jump scare the same way every single time. So the jump scare never felt like it got old. I felt tense and upset the entire time I was playing. I'm gonna be showing clips from my Twitch streams. Oh man, did this game get me good so many times. I struggled sleeping. I thought the environment design of the game was absolutely fascinating. It was hands down one of my favorite games I played last year by far. Man, did that game mess me up. It is usually at the top of my list whenever somebody asks for recommendations for horror games, especially horror games that scared the crap out of me specifically. Oh man. Madison. And let me tell you, the Lady Madison, she was our card. Sound like a boomer gamer dad when I say stuff like that. That is kind of sort of my energy right now. Next up, if you're more of a visual novel type person, I do definitely recommend Umi Neko no Nako Koroni. That is my favorite anime out there. It is a visual novel series by the creator who did Higurashi and several others, Ryukishi 7. He is also going to be in charge of one of our newer Silent Hill games coming up, so I highly recommend this one. I recommend this one over Higurashi because there is a plot point involving Halloween at some point during the story. The visual novel is split into two, the question arcs and then the answer arcs. There is time loops involved, so don't be confused. The first 4 arcs, essentially first 4 stories, are setting up the story for questions, making you wonder what's going on, where the final 4 starts to reveal more and more to you. Answer arcs. It's got amazing and incredible characters. It's highly inspired by Dante. I talked about it during my Dante video where I was rambling about that. Again, it's a visual novel, so it's not really gameplay, but some people prefer visual novels over wall-to-wall action like some of these other titles I've talked about. So let me be self-indulgent by recommending Umi Neko. Next up, I do actually want to mention Slender the Arrival. I know it's a game that got played to death when it came out on YouTube, but sometimes revisiting older games can be really enjoyable. But Slender the Arrival, man, even when you know the entire game and you know Slenderman, it's still stressful. It's spooky, it's stressful, it's classic. It's about, you know, I wanted to throw it in the list just kind of as a, you know, let's nod an homage to indie horror games of the past that have really shaped our future, and other games like, say, Madison or some of the others on this list that I've yet to talk about. We're almost there. I do have a few dating sim game recommendations for you. I am a huge lover of the dating sim. I screamed when Hooked on You came out. Loved it so much. It's a Dead by Daylight sim. If you don't know, Romanced Huntress immediately cosplayed her. Oh, great time. I do have 3 spooky and Halloween-y dating sims if that might pique your interest. Of course, I'm gonna recommend the Monster Prom series, especially the first Monster Prom. Very Monster High in vibes, but a lot more adult. They do explicitly state all of the characters are over the age of 18, so don't worry about that. It is an adult game. It has a very interesting skill check mechanic that can be a little bit difficult to grasp at first, so if you have a specific character you really want, don't be afraid to use a game guide, because it took me a couple playthroughs to figure out how to really work the game. But it's charming, it's funny, it's got dark, witty humor to it, can be just sat and laughed at with friends. You do have multiplayer gaming options with it too. Moving into something a little bit different, I'm gonna recommend Cooking Companions. Cooking Companions is an indie game that was highlighted by MatPat. I absolutely adore the devs that worked on this game, and they have a sequel coming up called Dreadweight. Oh my god, I'm so excited for Dreadweight. I did fund the Kickstarter for that one. And Cooking Companions, if I feel like it's in the title at this point. If cannibalism is terrifying to you, maybe stay away from this game. But I will say it jump scared me a few times. It has interesting characters, a wild ride of a story. The name title works in several different ways. It's a very, very nice take on the dating sim genre and kind of almost builds off like what Doki Doki Literature Club created, in that let's take the cute anime dating sim and subvert it with a bunch of horror themes. And this one does it in a very different way. It knows that you're playing a horror game right from the start, so it's like, we're gonna lull you into a false sense of security, but we're not going to pretend like this isn't a horror game. And also has a bunch of Eastern European mythology involved. One of many I'm going to be talking about in this video. Finally, the third dating sim that I want to recommend is called Sucker for Love, where you date Cthulhu, and she's adorable. I love Lynetta. See, I'm talking about a cosmic horror that is H.P. Lovecraft in nature. There are, of course, other characters that you can romance in the game, but Lynetta is my waifu for life, I will not lie. She's beautiful, she's great, she's got great voice acting, she's got pink squid hair. It's a very interesting and fun game to play that made me giggle personally. Now, speaking of Eastern European folklore-based horror games, I do have two games that are also in that list, and that is BLACKTAIL, which is another whimsical horror-themed first-person game with shooter and magic elements to it, where you essentially live out the origins of the Baba Yaga witch story. I call it whimsical horror because there is a very fairy tale vibe to a lot of the game. You can stick to the main quest and be totally fine, or you can veer off and do side stuff or explore the world. It's very interesting and very fun. I cosplayed from that game as well, and I really loved Yaga's character design. Overall, I was totally enamored with that game when it came out last year. It came out end of December, so not a lot of people talked about it, and I would love more people to do so. If you like the fairy tale aesthetics, like a little bit of combat, but you like some spooky undertones to it, BLACKTAIL. Plus, it's got a cat in it. You can never be too upset when there's a cat involved. Another one I want to recommend is Black Book. If you liked Inscription, that came out last year, I do also recommend Black Book. It's one that I helped fund through the Kickstarter, and my name is in the Kickstarter backers in the credits. Heck yeah. It's a lot like Inscription in the sense that it is kind of sort of card-based turn tactics, but very different. That's pretty much where the similarities converge. If you haven't played Inscription, please go play Inscription. It'll mess you up. Black Book is seeping with mythology. You play as a witch, there is a morality system involved, hell, a lost lover you must get back, magic out the wazoo, and another lovely cat companion. All right, we did it. We're in the autumn, fall vibes. Hello and welcome to people who may have skipped through the video and just wanted to see the autumn themed games, and hello to people who have stuck with me. I super appreciate it. We are got some more games to go through. And I apologize if I'm going through this a little fast. I'm just so excited. Now, Halloween is not the only great thing about fall. I'm very basic. Fall is my favorite holiday. I love the smell of a pumpkin scented candle. I love the leaves. I love to go pumpkin picking, and I love to wear my cozy sweaters and my leather denim jackets. Oh, so great, so fun. I love to sit by the fire and read a horror novel. So let's appreciate some autumn games. Mixture of cozy, a little bit of lighter horror ones, but I got a few for you if that's what you're hankering for. Starting with Cozy Grove. If you're an Animal Crossing fan, Cozy Grove is for you. It is a slow burn game designed to be played about 30 30 minutes to an hour, maybe at max a day. It does pace you with a real world clock, and it is worth it. Logging in every single day for almost an entire year, it was in fact one of my most played games on Steam last year, next to Elden Ring and Control and The Sims. It's very delightful. You play essentially like a Girl Scout or Boy Scout-esque type character, and you must help the ghosts on an abandoned island. Every single day you speak to them, revealing a little bit of extra nuggets about their history, their lore, and the island. You can decorate the island, harvest things, furniture. It's super, super adorable and very endearing. It's a gorgeous and cozy game as it as it implies. There's a great DLC, the characters are fantastic. It's just it's very great if you can't dedicate a lot of time to play video games and you just want something to log into and relax maybe at the start or the end of your day. Next up, I want to talk about Witchwood. Witchwood is another indie title, kind of again like Cozy Grove and Little Misfortune in the sense that it's got that 2D flat style to it. It's got great character design. You play as a witch who must collect various souls in order to resurrect a mysterious woman who you seem to have no memory of. There's a lot of crafting and gathering involved, which can be very soothing and calming, and the story is interesting. Each of the characters that you meet are highly stylized and very fascinating. It had a fantastic end to it, and it relaxed me a lot and was another one of my favorite games that I played last year. It's just the warm colors and aesthetic just, again, makes me feel like I should be burning a candle and sitting by a fireplace. Next up, another autumn one I want to recommend is Night in the Woods. This is a very cult classic indie game. Many of you probably perked up and go, oh, I know that game. You play as May, who is returning from college to her small hometown, reconnecting with her family, her friends. Things aren't maybe going great for her, and it's especially hit home for me when I first played the game when I was in my younger 20s. I'm 28 now, but it still hurt. The game still hurts. The characters, again, are fantastic. The music is chef's kiss. The developers are working on a similar in art style kind of game. It's got a great underlying mystery to the town, that very small town, you can't go home again kind of vibes. It hits hard when you're college age or young 20s. Even in your later life, it might resonate with you as well. Those feelings of expectations and growing up, maybe not wanting to grow up, frustration. It's overall a fantastic game. I cannot recommend enough. It takes place, of course, in autumn, so you've got them spooky autumn vibes. It is just visually a masterwork. You can get it on any sort of platform, and it's great if you're really, really into video games, or if you're maybe more casually into video games as well. It's not a super long title, but will keep you engaged for quite some time. Well, yes, there are plenty of other super cozy games that are like Cozy Grove that you can pick up during this time period. Bear and Breakfast is another great cozy game, but not necessarily one that gives me fall vibes. I wanted to stick very specifically to autumn with these recommendations. I do hope to definitely do another video like this one next year, and hopefully I will have more cozy recommendations prepped for you all. But I try to include a nice list of indie and AAA titles. Maybe you've heard of some of these, maybe you haven't. Please let me know what you guys think if you pick up any of these games. I want to know your thoughts. Maybe you have other video game recommendations, whether they be cozy autumn ones or spooky, scary horror ones that you think that should be included on this list. I want to know. Talk to me about it in the comments. Hopefully this list got you a little bit more excited for spooky season. I know I'm coming out with this at the end of September, where we're kind of already in the mix of it, but the shark video took me a lot longer to do. So I tried to get this one out as quick as possible. It's part of why I talked so fast and wanted to be very vague, but hopefully this list gave you a few new gaming inspirations. Please let me know. And Hi, I'm Horror Queen Cosplay. I do lots of... Hopefully this video gave you lots of great video game inspirations and recommendations. Please let me know. I'm gonna do the stereotypical YouTuber thing where I say if you want to hear me ramble about video games way more in depth, please subscribe or like, all that fun stuff. I do also do videos talking about cosplay as well. Trust me, don't worry. But hopefully I will see you for the next one and have a fantastic and spooky Halloween. Bye!